But I heard myself say that the other day, and I realized on these Zoom calls, it's my common statement. I say, let me hit record before I forget, because I had forgotten in the early days a lot. Yesterday was the first time in a long time I forgot. But I heard myself say it, you get really, your head starts to let you hear things more as you do this work more. And I knew I said it, but all of a sudden it hit me what a stupid statement that is. Let me hit this before I forget. Well, it wouldn't do any good if you forgot and then we're going to hit it, because you wouldn't remember to hit it. So it's kind of one of those dumb statements. It just all of a sudden occurred to me how silly it was. Hello, Devin. She looks very studious, ready for class.
Hi.
Ready?
Yeah, she does.
And then Angela's laid back. You look like she's ready for a little cozy nap.
Have my recliner rocking.
Robin just looks kind of chilling up there.
Yeah, I got Alice with me again.
Oh, did we?
Yeah.
That's a sweet name for an animal. My cat that I have right now is named after my stepmother, who died a few years ago, but her name was Max. So I call this one Maxie, because for some weird reason, all of my animals' names started ending with an I many, many, many years ago. I don't know if it's because Patty with an I, because that's what my mom spelled Patty as when I was a kid. I don't know when it started, but it got silly after a while. But now that I'm this age, Art, I guess I can call it, what do they call it? Eccentric?
Yeah, I think so.
Am I getting old enough to use that? Yeah. The only problem is I've been eccentric since I was like 4 or 5, I think. So my grandmother raised me, so I always had an old soul. I loved hanging out with her friends and stuff. And interestingly, she was my age when she died, 74. I think about that because she seemed so old. Anyway, let's get down to what we're here for. Do y'all have a good night? Did you sleep well? Y'all sleep really well? Yeah. Do you already, because I know you all are quite, advanced in the concepts of what we're going to be doing in this training, and applying what you bring into this, of course, to all of these new things that can hopefully expand everything you've been doing and bring some new nuances and some new kind of ways of approaching things. Do you already give yourself suggestions and mantras or affirmations and things like that? Have any of you worked with any of those things? Angela, did you start to say something a minute ago?
No, I do a lot of that
enlightening moment there. What?
I do a lot of that stuff every day.
You do, yeah. It's part of your routines kind of thing. It's interesting because sometimes we do things until somebody asks us and we go, well, yeah, because it's such part of what we do that sometimes we don't realize maybe we're doing it. Yeah. And hopefully through this training, you'll discover some more even deeper and different, some effective ways to expand on all of that for yourself and for your clients. You all slept well, you said. I had a good night's sleep. I did it in 2 parts. I slept for about 4 hours, then I woke up for about 3 hours, and then I went back to sleep for another 3 or so hours, which is a lot for me. But that's what happens when I get into the mode of doing a training, because there's so much that I want to cover with you. And like I said, we are going to skip around and cover little pieces of things. And then as we go through the training, some of those pieces will come back to be expanded on and to look deeper into and to add to, and all of those kind of things. So that's, like I said, yesterday and today are kind of laying a lot of foundation for what we're going to extremely build on. I started to say I was in the back room grabbing some books, and I started looking around at you were talking about your library yesterday, Art. And I ended up, I was going to just pull 2 or 3 to kind of show and tell as I show one of the PowerPoints here. And I ended up pulling 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 books. And some of them are really big. And I had this stack, and as I'm walking out, I thought to myself, all those books. And as I'm looking at them, I'm opening them, every single one of them has highlighting, and I've written papers on most of them, because a lot of them, I don't know if most of them, but a lot of them, probably about half of them, are from my degree that I did that took many years. And I did, some of these books are really massive books that I did multiple papers on. and research and things. So, and I thought to myself, how did I have time to do all of that? I mean, in my head, I've been so busy the last 30 plus years that I don't know how I did all that on top of what else I was doing. Life is interesting. And I think it's because hypnosis causes time distortion. I read that somewhere. I think it was yesterday. Time distortion, by the way, since it came up just now, is a wonderful, they call them convincers. Every time I have to say that word, or I see it in a hypnosis book, or it's on some of my handouts even still, I want to be careful, because I guess many years ago when I first started training people, we talk about something in the pre-talk, the very first session, that you want to do, you want to start to get some idea of how the person's mind works, how they process information, right? So there's things we do, and also there's some other reasons we'll talk about when we get to these in a few, later on today. But there's little demonstrations you can do with your client, little things to show them how their physical body responds to what they're imagining. And there's some little, they call them suggestibility tests. Again, I don't like that word either, because I think everyone's suggestible if they have a mind that can think and they want to be hypnotized. I think they will be suggestible to something that fits with what they're asking help with. But they are called suggestibility tests in the textbooks, the hypnosis books. They're also called convincers, and they're also called responsiveness tests. And whenever I would teach it in the early days of training people, I would make it very clear. I said, now, these aren't the kind of tests. If you use that word ever, be aware it's not a test that the client can pass or fail. So that part of it. And some people, just hearing the word test, they tense up. So I wouldn't ever want to say that to a client anyway. just like once the interview is over, I don't want to start talking about their pain, because it's a emotionally charged word that creates a sensation in the body instantly. They've done studies on that. So we'll talk about that later more as well. But they've done studies on the pain. I call it the P word. Because in a hospital, they did a thing where the nurse or doctor would come in and ask, which they do quite often, how is your pain, or what's your pain level? And every time the patient would hear that word, upon hearing the word, the body instantly experienced more pain. So, that makes me say, if I'm in a hypnosis setting, we have the luxury of using our language in ways that can make the entire experience with us be more comfortable at the very least. And I think about how many types of therapies or treatments do people go to that they walk out feeling better than when they walked in. There aren't a whole lot of things you can say that about, I wouldn't think, when it comes down to therapeutic type work, which is what I think this is, even when we're doing it, when we don't need a referral for things like weight and smoking and simple stress, or sports habits, those kind of things, study habits, those kind of things. Even when it's for those kind of things, it is, I believe it is therapeutic, because the state itself is therapeutic for the organism. The state of relaxation we can get people to, and the way we can shift around some of their little triggers and get them to start focusing on things that cause them to be in a better emotional state generally. We're still focused on their goal, but that, everything, it ripples out. There's a ripple effect that I talk about in the pre-talk with all the clients. I say, we're going to focus on one thing, because the starting point for hypnosis, the reason the watch that Art was talking about yesterday, the reason for that is to get the mind to narrow the focus on one thing. And the watch, by the way, didn't go this way when they used watches. That's almost like EMDR. You could use that therapeutically too in certain ways, right? But it did this way because, and the whole purpose of these little rituals is to, first of all, focus the mind on one thing. Doesn't really matter what it is, but one thing. And then this kind of movement fatigues the eyes. So as you're using hypnotic language, doing something like this, and that person's eyes are, the focusing back and forth, back and forth. Now, again, you want to be careful with some people, because if you do that long enough with some people, they might start to get a headache or something. You don't want to strain their eyes to the point where there's pain or discomfort. But if you do it, just for a few seconds there, the eyes get tired and they want to close. They don't want to do that anymore. And that's the point. That's the point of some of the inductions that you're going to be learning are about, like we were talking about yesterday. We want to get that critical faculty. We want to narrow the focus first on one thing to start to get rid of some of the clutter that people got a lot on their minds these days. And then as they focus more and more on one thing, whatever it is, the hypnotic language is to start to bypass that critical faculty with confusion techniques or overloading the logical part of the mind, as the eyes close, eliminating some of that distraction. I'm going to mute Art for a second, just in case he's got something going on. So the whole idea of the induction is to bypass the critical faculty. And all that means is while the person is in the hypnotic state and we're talking to their creative unconscious, we don't want them in there evaluating or trying to figure out or make sense of or judge, critiquing, picking it apart kind of thing with the conscious mind. And again, I really do a lot of conscious and unconscious work with my clients. I believe from all the research I've done for the many years that my pre-talk, even before I ever heard of cognitive behavioral therapy, because when I started researching that, I remembered as I'm reading about it and studying it, I said to myself many times, this looks and sounds a lot like what I do what I've been doing in my pre-talk for many years. So I think the cognitive behavioral therapy blended with hypnotic language, even in the pre-talk, can start to, from the very beginning, help that person start moving incrementally, slowly into that place where their conscious mind starts to feel so comfortable and sometimes a little confused or overloaded stuff the conscious mind can't deal with that's in there intentionally, so that by the time you start the induction, when people say, oh, I couldn't get that person to go into hypnosis, to me, they're already there before I start the ritual of, okay, now we're going to, I usually say something these days like, now we're going to take it, or are you ready to take it to a deeper level now? And sometimes I'll even say to them, because they start to get the glassy eyes and, before I even start the induction, sometimes I might say, depending on the person's personality, I might say, and I'm not sure if you realize that you're already drifting into a beautiful hypnotic state here with your eyes open. You seem a lot more relaxed than you walked in. And I won't say that unless I'm 100% sure. Don't say something unless you absolutely know that the answer is going to be the one that helps the client. But when I know there else, or I might say something like, and you may even know sitting here now that your energy is a lot different than when you came here today. And of course, my voice is changing too, along with the pacing and leading thing, right? And they'll always say, yeah, they're already there. So I may or may not say, you may not realize it yet. I might say this to some people. You actually are already drifting into the hypnotic state. Yes, you can do it with your eyes open. And yet it's so nice to go ahead and let those eyes close at some point so that you can eliminate some of this outside stuff, because in there you can be in the world of the unlimited mind, your wonderful imagination that can go anywhere and do anything and doesn't have any limits whatsoever. I might talk like that for a while with their eyes open because I know they're still going deeper. And then by the time I get them to look at a spot on the wall or stare at their thumb or, whatever comes up. Dave Ellman, he was known for rapid inductions. And I took a class, he was dead before I got into this, I think, but his son, Larry Ellman, I used to go to some of his seminars. And he talked about his father. I don't know why I remember this particular one, but he talked about he said, they always talk about the Ellman induction, which you will learn. It's a beautiful induction. And it's not like he only had one induction, but they call it the Ellman induction because it's kind of the iconic thing that's attributed to him. But his son said he would pick up anything. he'd pick up a pencil, he said, and I remember him doing this. He picked up the pencil and he said, and he would just come to him in the moment. He said, he'd pick up a pencil and he'd tell the person, stare at the tip of the pencil, stare at the eraser at the top, and just stare at that eraser. And then he'd do some hypnotic patter, we call it. And then he would slowly start to let that eraser, as he's talking and his voice is matching, drifting down. And then he'd let it drop like that at some point, which it just did it automatically with me. And that's what would happen. And at that point, the eyes usually close. And if not, you can set it up so, and when this pencil drops in a little while, you can just let those eyes close and go into a nice peaceful place inside of yourself. It's just a real simple thing. So you can use anything to take that person into that little bit deeper realm. But part of the induction, part of the ritual we do with induction and some deepening usually, and then the therapeutic section or the body of work, the main part of the transformational part where you're doing the change work. I think the change work is happening all the time, but where it's officially being addressed. And then the emerging part at the end where you bring them out of the hypnotic state. And then the post-talk, those are the elements of the session. The whole ritual really of doing a induction of some kind is, well, there's probably a couple of reasons. One reason is to meet the expectations of the client. I love conversational hypnosis, and I think I am still doing conversational types of hypnotic processes, even though I am also doing some kind of a cool ritual that I know the client can enjoy doing. And it also can set up something so that the next time they come in, if, assuming they had a really good experience with the little ritual that I started the first time. And of course, when I say, are you ready to go into a nice hypnotic experience now? And they of course say yes. I'm going to dim, when I'm in my office, I'm going to dim the lights. I'm going to walk over and start the recording with the background sounds that aren't music, because I don't want it to sound like anything they've ever heard before, but there's some nice hypnotic sounds. Or you can do Tibetan bowls or binaural, what are those binaural sounds, or there's all kinds of things that are good at helping people get in their focus. So there's that ritual that goes along with it when they're seeing me at my office. And sometimes I close the blinds if it's really bright light coming in. So all of those things. Then the second time they come, first of all, they've listened to my recording all week with my voice on it. So they've been hypnotized by me another 6 or 7 times, assuming they followed my instructions, which they usually do. And I get a commitment from them, which we're also going to talk about today, how I do that. And the next time they come in, their unconscious mind hears my voice. And my assumption is, and I truly believe this, it starts to already make those adjustments before they even sit in the chair. Because it goes, oh, good, we get to go back to that place. The unconscious loves hypnosis. It loves it. Because when you're in hypnosis, it can do all the stuff it does without the interference of all that other stuff, right? And again, they've done it like 6, 7 times. So even if they never were hypnotized until that first session, now they've done it 6, 7, 8 times with my voice. And we know that the first time they did it with me from point A to point B, I make real sure they get to a good level of hypnosis for them to know this was different than other things I've done. And then the second time when they listen to my recording, I know it's not going to be like twice as easy or twice as fast. It's going to be maybe 10 or 20 times as fast or easy, because the brain has the track now, and it loves where it ends up. It's a healthy, very healthy place for the organism, and the unconscious runs the body and all of the other things. So it knows that's a good place to be. So it learns it very quickly. So the second time, maybe it took 20 minutes to get to a certain level. The next time it might take 5. And the next time it might take 3. So every time it gets more efficient, and pretty soon from point A to point B goes zip. Like I said, I'm convinced if I had the biofeedback electrode thing, the gooey things on my head, that I could take 1 or 2 breaths and probably be in theta consciousness, if that was my strong intention. And sometimes when I'm in the dentist office, I've had some practice with having to create a very quick way to go back to it. If he interrupts me, he likes to talk a lot. No matter how many times I tell him, please don't talk unless you absolutely have to. He can't help himself. He keeps saying, are you okay? You sure you're okay? I've been going to him for years. I'm just used to it. I block him out now, unless he says, open your mouth or turn your head or something. But, it gives you opportunity. But you can, the track there, my point is, can be very quick. If you trust it, again, keep that critical faculty out of the way. Stop doubting it. Stop thinking it sounds too easy or it's can't be that fast. If you just get rid of all that junk, your mind can do it. It can go there instantly. So the client, even without any pre-experience, I know that when I see them the second time, I'm going to do some pre-talk, see where they are now. And then I'm going to say, so you ready? And they're going to go, yeah. Because they're ready, even consciously. They know this feels really good. They're going to tell me they've been sleeping better. All these things that I tell them the first 5 minutes, I want to hear only the things in the last week that were improved, even if it has nothing to do with your reason that you think you're here. So they'll say things like, well, I've been sleeping great. I haven't slept that good in years, or say, that's one of the first benefits of doing any kind of hypnosis. So I always kind of expect that one. And then they'll tell me some other things they didn't expect. Like I had to go visit so-and-so, and they usually get on my nerves. And I realized I wasn't as upset. Very good. You did a good job. So then I, you're ready to do it. And then I start dim the lights, turn the music on. And their mind remembers that. Their unconscious has that pattern now. It's ingrained in the mind. And by the time I start to do an induction the second time, I can get really creative now and get a lot more work done during the induction, do a deepener. And most of my deepeners are meant to be therapeutic deepeners anyway that I've written, and I can do something that comes up and add hypnotic suggestions and language and imagery and all that into the entire process and make it much more effective. So the ritual of hypnosis, for purposes of this training and you learning step 1, 2, 3, 4 for training purposes, there will be a sequence and there will be a certain elements that for your outside assignments, you're going to be required to make sure you cover all of them. There are a few that could be in different order, but you're going to be required to do them all. Once you start actually working with clients with hypnotherapy, they may be in a different order. There may be some things that you choose with certain clients that you don't need to do because maybe you've covered the concept in a different way. But during training, we're going to keep it more regimented. Does that make sense? So, because every once in a while I get a student who had a practice client, and they'll come back and they'll say, well, I didn't do the misconceptions because they've been hypnotized 1,000 times. They said they don't need that. And I said, let me reiterate. That's a requirement for you because it's not for the practice client. It's for you. It's for you to practice how to explain all of these things. Because your next client might come in and say, I heard my friend told me this, and you're going to have to explain it. And if it's the first time you explained it, it's not going to be very flowing. So just remember all of the things you're doing in practice, both here and some of the little exercises we do here aren't something you would do with a client. It's to develop your ability to do this work. Does that make sense? So when you're doing the outside assignments, the elements you're doing are for you to be able to have the opportunity to practice important things that way when they show up or something similar shows up in a session, you'll already have that. You'll have the feel for it. You won't have to go into your head and start, figuring out what am I going to say? How am I going to answer this? It'll be more of a flow. Does that sound good for everybody? Yeah, sound right. Any statements, comments, questions about yesterday so far, or about what we're doing here in general? Anybody?
Hey,
Yeah,
Patty.
Art. Yeah, Art.
I'll just throw in a little story just to help new people understand what may be going on, but because what you're doing and what you think the client's doing, sometimes the client's doing something quite different, and you may know it or you may never know it. So I was doing a presentation at the Florida Hypnosis, the Florida Creativity Conference on hypnosis, how you can use your unconscious mind to be creative more powerfully and more quickly. So I did my spiel, and I said, anybody got any questions? And basically I said, I want you to get a problem that you've been having trouble with, and then we're going to ask your unconscious mind to please solve this problem for you. So that was fundamentally, that was the message that I was delivering. So I hypnotized this group, about 35 people, and they all went into a nice trance, and I did my thing, and then I brought them back, and I said, anybody have any thing that they'd like to tell? Well, it just erupted. There was, I got a solution to problem. I didn't even think of this. It was right. So it was really good. And there was one guy that never said a word. He was sitting down in front of me on the left, and everybody got up and left except this guy. And he said, I wanted to tell you what happened, but I didn't want to do it in front of the group because it's, that's kind of personal. But he said, I was not going to come here today because my hip is causing me so much pain that I could barely walk. And when I walk, I would cry. It was hurting so bad. And I thought, well, I'm not going to that conference. And he thought, well, my hip will hurt here or my hip will hurt there. I might as well go, and and it isn't going to change anything there. I'll just tough it out. So he said, what I want to tell you is that my hip doesn't hurt anymore. And he said, did you do that? And I said, did you hear me say anything about hips? And he said, no. I said, did you hear me say anything about pain? No. Then, so here's my take on what happened. What do you remember that I asked you to do? And he said, get a big problem that's causing you a lot of trouble and you can't figure out the solution, and help me solve it. Whatever it was you thought was the big problem, your unconscious thought, no, I got this other problem here. I got this hip pain. I'm going to use this process on that. And he said, I just want to thank you for showing me what's possible to do with your mind. And it was just the most unexpected thing at all. And he just got up and walked out, and there was just no pain at all. So I didn't know that he was doing that. And if he hadn't told me, I never would have known. But I did my job about creativity, and he used it on a totally different application, which is great. And I was glad to get the feedback. So I just want you to know that sometimes your clients are taking care of things that you're not even aware. They're using your material to solve their problems and apply to their life, which is fabulous. It's just great. So keep it up.
I love that. That brings up a good point too, because the old style from the last century, and again, it was left over from stage hypnosis, where direct suggestion, tell the person what to do, in hypnosis. And then even though they've been telling themselves to do that out of hypnosis forever, somehow it's going to be different. And, and sometimes, if the person thought it was going to work, it'll work a little bit. We all know about the placebo effect, faith in the treatment you're getting goes a long way toward the healing process or the change work. But from what Art was saying, that's why I think the new wave of hypnotherapy, that actually, when you look at the history, there were a lot of people who kind of more did it the way that Milton Erickson did. It's not like all of a sudden there was one person that started this whole movement. But the idea of not being so direct, and to think, like Art was saying, to assume that I know or the client even knows what's really going on here. They have the presenting issue. And what makes what we do special and permanent a lot of times, and to really get to the deeper root, if you will, of what's going on. The layers, and it's interesting you brought that up, because one of the things I'm bringing is my layer chart that I created about a year ago.
Oh,
remember
good,
that? Yeah, and I keep changing it, but we can get through the layers, and I think more often than not, we're dealing with something that is either an emotional issue, or like we were talking about yesterday, a identity type of limiting or false idea they have about themselves or the world. That it isn't the presenting issue. We want to respect what the client comes in with and let that be what their conscious mind thinks they're there for. We don't want to, if they come in to quit smoking, I know some hypnotists that if the person weighs, 400 pounds, they would say, well, maybe we ought to work on the weight first. It's just my opinion, but I don't think that first of all, I think it's rude. If they come to you for something, as long as you're morally and ethically okay with that, I work because again, even with cigarette smoking, I don't think we're working on cigarette smoking. They think we are. That's what's important. It's always something that's beneath that or behind that. And that's the theme that you're going to hear all throughout this training. And that's why I think permissive language, storytelling, metaphors, all of these things that I originally had heard work best in the medical side, I right away started thinking, wait a minute, this is just the way the creative mind functions.
Yeah.
So it works for anything. You get the imagination engaged and get that logic out of the way for a little while. And then that part of the mind that really knows what this is all about, this is a little symptom or a little behavior that's being produced because of this thing back here that is also, by the way, usually causing some other problems, which is why that ripple effect with hypnosis, when you're addressing that one thing to get their focus on it consciously, that the unconscious starts to resolve a lot of other things along with it in that ripple effect. Whole point is to get to the key, the root cause, the initial sensitizing event. If you're doing regression or timeline or something, there's a lot of different words we use for these things, but the point is you get to the meat of it. You get to the Charles Tebbetts, the parts therapy guy, he used to call it hit and pay dirt. You're getting to it within that client what really is the source of this presenting issue, whether it's smoking, whether it's warts or cancer, it doesn't matter, or depression. Yeah, Robin.
It's just interesting the way you're sharing, and it's making me wonder, and Angela, I guess, can attest to this, is that, I do the craniosacral. So when you brought up about the brain has the tracking, when I'm doing, for me personally, when I'm doing cranial, I say to the client a lot of times, because they don't know what's going on, like the body, but the body remembers. So the next time the body goes right into it. And you just sharing all of this information, both you and Art, it's almost, now I'm wondering is there hypnosis that's actually going on here? I'm using hypnosis with my hands versus the using the words. So now to have them both, this is really neat and eye-opening.
This is one of those big light bulb moments.
Yes, it is.
And even before it came out of your mouth, I looked at you and I got it. She gets it. She gets it.
Oh yeah.
That's really nice. Yeah, and absolutely, because the principles are the principles. Hypnosis is just a name somebody came up with and put it on this field, and ask 1,000 hypnotists and they'll have completely different ideas about what even that means. Well, you're not even doing hypnosis. This is what hypnosis is. It doesn't matter. The labels, that's why I never was a labels person. So when I got into hypnosis, I would just get a kick out of all these people who said, this is the way to do it, and you got to do it this way. You got to get to the root cause in the first session, or you're never going to get results. And I'm like, okay, all of those opinions sound really limiting to me, and I tend to like the word unlimited. so I would just kind of think it doesn't matter. Those labels are unimportant. The only reason labels are important is for what it means to your client. Right. If you let it be important to you, then it's going to affect what you do as well. So my next question, when somebody says something to me or does something, I have like a knee jerk, we used to call it, reaction. And I do think I sort of was born with this. Thank you again. But I really developed it in this field more so that people don't annoy me quite as much as they used to with those strong opinions. But I have a knee-jerk reaction to just, my mind always is when somebody makes a statement or a fact or something they believe or something, or an opinion, it's always just an opinion anyway, that my thought is always, maybe that's interesting. I wonder if that, what else is there? In other words, open it up. It automatically in my metaphorical internal representation, the IR, remember from yesterday, the thing that my unconscious does with those kinds of things, those opinions from people, my internal representation is that my consciousness metaphorically goes zip. For some reason, it ends up on the left side. I don't know why. I could analyze that, but I don't really care. All I know is it moves out of the way. So I have all this space now to observe just in case that's not right. I still got it. I still heard it. I still go, yeah, sounds right. But I'm still going to leave all this open because, facts change. Truth doesn't change, but facts change. And people's opinions or how the labels and all those things change. All of a sudden now, something is happening in the medical world that I'm really finding very satisfying for my creative unconscious intelligence. Because I had a nephew who had it wasn't even a peanut allergy. It was just any kind of nuts. And I know the environment he grew up in. And at a very young age, I started being told that he was being taken to the hospital sometimes, and that he had this severe allergy. Now, I didn't see him that often because I was on the road at that time and doing different things. Came to visit one time after he was a teenager, and all of us went out to dinner at I forget what kind of restaurant it was, some food that I've never eaten before. I think it was Indian or something. Anyway, it was a different kind of food that I wasn't familiar with. And it was one of those things where everybody's eating off some big platter or something, it seemed like. And all of a sudden, there were about 10 of us there. He jumped up and ran out of the restaurant. It was nighttime. And I looked around and I asked my sister, so what's going on? She says, oh my God, the waiter and he'd been eating now for like a half hour, at least. I remember that part. She said the waiter just told him that there's some kind of nut in this one little sauce that he had some of. And he ran outside and had a reaction. He didn't have the reaction until he found out there was nuts in there, by the way. But I've had a theory. And when I got into hypnosis, I kept the theory because the people that were dealing with allergies and things like that in hypnosis, the ones that I found, thankfully, matched up to my belief that I'd had all my life. And now, I don't know if you all have heard recently, the last couple of weeks, major long-term science research is showing that if you introduce a little bit of peanuts, the big peanut allergy thing didn't get bad until about the last 20 years. They started banning peanuts on planes and everything else. You all familiar with this, right? The peanut thing, when I was growing up, nobody talked about any kind of nut allergies or peanut allergies. This is a very recent phenomenon. And all of a sudden, a whole lot of kids were getting it. It didn't make sense to me. So now they've got new research, and they're finding if you start introducing as a baby, as a toddler, just a teeny bit of peanut now and then, and they've got a long-term study now, which is why it took so long, that shows that the percentages that end up with a peanut allergy is almost negligible. It's almost none. And when they do, it's very minimal, any of the ones that it did have them. So a lot of people freaked out, got scared, talked about peanut allergies, talked about banning peanuts. Oh my God, they're like my sister's son, he was fine until he heard there was peanuts in the food. So we know that we can eliminate allergies with hypnosis. We know that, right? Now, some people don't believe it, and some hypnotists might not believe it, by the way. But those of us that have done it and that know it, I got rid of my own allergy a couple times now, a couple different ones. Because, you get new influence from the environment, you may develop an allergy later in life. A lot of people end up with an allergy in their 50s or 60s that they never had before that. I don't know. But anyway, we know that we can do this. We can work with allergies and get relief with hypnosis. So my belief says the fear, think of the state that's created when you have panic. Remember, we talked about it's instant hypnosis. And when people started panicking about this peanut thing, and mothers started getting afraid about the peanut allergies that all the kids were getting, and how horrible. I'm not saying ignore that stuff to people ever, but I am saying as a hypnotherapist, it helps me, and it helps me to help my clients to know that it isn't necessarily accurate that they have to keep an allergy and that they have to take medicine the rest of their life for an allergy. Now, if they're not coming to me for that, I'm not going to give them that information. I'm only telling you because you're in a training to be a hypnotherapist, and I want you to know that that is a possibility. There was a lady named Ann King from Texas, by the way. Ann King's Hypnosis Center in Texas. Are you familiar with it already?
That sounds familiar.
No.
Yeah. A gentleman named Jim. It'll come to me in a second. I'll just let it go. It'll come to me in a second. She sold her business to him. She decided to retire a year or two ago. And he's a master trainer for the IACT as well. And what she did way back when I was becoming a trainer 25 years ago, 20 to 25 years ago, I knew her from going to conferences for all the years I'd been doing this. And she had shared with me before I became a trainer, and that she had partnered with a allergy clinic that was close by her center. And she was doing great with allergies, and she wanted to get some documented proof. So she is the only one that I know of that ever did this. She got with this allergy clinic, and she would have people do a blood test that were coming to her. She would work with them on people that had allergies. They'd do the blood test to show the allergy in their blood. There's some tests they give them. And then she would do a single session, and it's an NLP process that has a lot of hypnotic language in it. And it's a fairly lengthy process for NLP. Most of those are pretty quick, but this is a little bit longer, more hypnotic, like I said. And she'd do one session, and then she'd have that person go back to the clinic and do a blood test. And she had, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but I remember it was somewhere in the 70% range. She did it. I forget how many people she worked with, but the people proven by blood test, it was in the 70% range that many of them proven by blood test didn't have the allergy anymore after one session. Now, she said some people required 2 or 3 sessions. And I don't remember her saying if anybody didn't respond, but that's a pretty impressive thing, isn't it? And a lot of people think you tell them that, they'd say that's impossible, that's a lie. I know firsthand because I know her. And I know that, and I put it into my training. It used to be in this training, and now it's because it's kind of a lengthy thing. It's in the medical training, not every time, but it's because there's so many things to teach. It's never the same exactly twice, but it's offered to them as a if I don't do it in the training class, they still get the process. And she gave me permission to do her languaging on it because it's just so beautiful, and it's geared exactly for an allergy. It's just so simple. And if you explain it to someone, just verbally, they'd say, "That can't work. That's not going to work." 70% something percent. I said, that's pretty impressive. So belief and expectation is a lot about what we do as well, like I said, and engaging that person's inner workings of their mind, their body, their ability to talk to the cells of the body in some creative way that they find interesting or acceptable to them. Because the same exact technique isn't going to work with everybody. If your client makes a face when you start mentioning something, you probably want to go in a different direction or do some more explanation or something. But you don't want to do something that the client isn't 100% engaged in. So since we brought up working at things deeper, at a deeper level, and after what Robin mentioned, I'm going to go to something different than the little chart. I told you I like little simple. I think these are good for our creative mind to see these kind of things too. To see a simple representation. And I did this a couple years ago, and I've got a little bit of a different one now that I use for something else. Because the general idea, because I've used the term subtext ever since I've been in hypnosis about seeing the meaning behind the words, detecting what the meaning the client's unconscious wants you to understand that is beyond the surface. I've talked about that ever since I got here. I think it probably came from acting. That's a term we use in acting a lot, where the actor is incongruent. They're acting like they're really sincere, and yet there's something coming through that tells you, I don't think they're really telling the truth about this. That doesn't sound I think that might be not quite accurate, So there's the subtext, and it's something we do unconsciously. So as a hypnotherapist, we want to always be tuned in to the client's unconscious mind. Their conscious mind knows just a teeny tiny bit of an opinion about what's really going on. So in the pre-talk, we're going to go into how to respect that part, and then for us to know, to kind of know that we're going past that what we're really going to be addressing is much deeper than that usually. So subtext, beyond the surface, it means. On this, it just says diagnosis or label. That's if they have been diagnosed with something, in which case, of course, you would have that medical referral, and you are definitely qualified, when you finish this training, to deal with things as long as you're comfortable with it, because it's not about, the label is just something some human, like I said, they stamp it on their head so they can put them in a category and create the treatment program in the medical community. I get that's the way it has to work. For us, the first thing that happens in my office, and that I think is useful for a hypnotherapist, is once we know what they're there for consciously on the surface level, and make note of that, mainly to know if we need a referral or not, that label, that diagnosis becomes, in my opinion, pretty much irrelevant. Not completely irrelevant. There are some things that you will address with suggestions, but this isn't what you're really dealing with to make the change happen. This turns into the outcome, right? Instead of them focusing on what's wrong and the diagnosis or the label or the problem, if they aren't diagnosed, my eating problem, my sugar problem, my smoking problem, whatever it is, that gets put aside, because that's not really, it's not about that. What we're dealing with is beneath that, behind that, beyond that. So there are certain symptoms, behaviors, habits, and self-talk. That's that next level. And we can detect a lot of that in that pre-talk, in the interview, by asking questions. We can start to hear, how do they frame this problem to themselves? How do they talk about themselves as a smoker? What's their opinion about people who smoke, about the health benefits of smoking? Wait, that was back in the 50s. I'm sorry. The health challenges or whatever. And then even it occurs to me, and again, this is simplified, so there could be a lot more on this, but just to keep it simple, beneath that, and I will send you all this, by the way. If you go deeper beyond the symptoms or the behavior, the habit, the self-talk, what's supporting that is now we're at the unconscious level, aren't we? Their beliefs. If it's a problem up at the top, then those beliefs are going to be either limiting or false, right? If they're supporting a problem. The emotions, again, unconscious runs the emotions. So now we're at the unconscious level. We're getting to that deeper level. The emotions, again, that support the problem or the diagnosis are going to be limiting, are negative emotions, right? The attitudes, same thing, limiting or negative attitudes that are formed because of the beliefs and the emotions. They get an attitude about this thing that is their, presenting issue or diagnosis. Now, go even a little deeper. What's supporting the attitudes, beliefs, and emotions are sometimes fears and doubts. There's going to be some fears and doubts underneath that. And again, there might be some more things. I may add some more. I don't want to get too complicated here, but that's generally, you're going to find some of those. And then at the seat, at the very center, if you will, is their identity. Like I said, that's the rock solid thing that their unconscious will never act against. So all of this stuff at the top, when they have a problem or a diagnosis, a condition or a bad habit or something, all of these things that are supporting it are creating their identity as it pertains to that problem or that diagnosis. So now you've got the identity supporting the problem. And since the unconscious understands all of this stuff about, that's not really a true belief, and that's not, this isn't really You know, this attitude is limiting you, and your unconscious knows it, but unfortunately the unconscious can't set a goal for you. So as long as you keep the self-talk and everything above that supporting an identity that is a smoker in this case, then everything has to follow along with that. And even though the unconscious runs the body and really kind of knows that that's not the, you know, maybe the ideal state to be in, to inhale that smoke, it has to go along with what the self-talk is saying it wants it to do. If it's possible, it has to do it. And what did the self-talk say when they taught themselves how to smoke in this case? It said back in our day, Art, probably something like, you know, I'm a teenager now and I want to impress the girls. So, you know, James Dean walks around smoking that cigarette and looks really cool. So I think I'll learn to smoke. And that first puff, the unconscious gave them a little bit of a hint that it might not be the best idea they ever had. In my case, a big enough hint that I thought I was going to die. And that was kind of a nice gift from my unconscious, because I definitely was never going to inhale that again. But because you keep doing it, because even though if they coughed or whatever and choked and whatever, the goal isn't to smoke the cigarette. The goal is to be cool. And that's a powerful motivation for a teenager. I want to attract the girls. I'm going to be cool like James Dean, right? So the unconscious had to start adapting and figuring out, okay, you keep saying you're going to do this. You want to learn to do this. The conscious mind sets the intention. And after whatever amount of time it took, that guy in this case, that teenager, all of a sudden sees his girl that he's really wanting to impress walking down the hall, you know, and he pulls out a cigarette and lights it up and he looks really cool now. So, you know, the goal has been met and the body and the mind adapted, the beliefs, the emotions, got rid of any doubts or fears because those weren't even important. You know, if they saw years later an ad on TV and they still loved smoking, they probably ignored it and said, nah, that doesn't apply to me. Remember, the conscious mind, the filters, they compare, contrast, they delete, distort, and generalize based on this stuff, which is why you can look at someone and say, how can they do that when they know this? And it's because the filters are filtering out this. They either don't see it, or when they see it, it doesn't affect their emotions at all. Their mind blocks it out or has a different attitude about it, so that I don't care. That's not going to happen to me. I'm fine. So that's what the filters do. So as long as the identity, everything's going to match up to this now. And it's a self-fulfilling loop, like on that chart I showed you yesterday. So I will send you this along with that chart. Now we're at the center where we're working. At the center here with that passion, I put that in because the desired outcome, they have to have a lot of motivation. They got to be passionate about what they want, because this stuff up here at the top, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but all this stuff at the top is powerful. It's rock solid at the unconscious. It's been learned. It's already in there. It's already trained in. It's already habitual and being reinforced with the habitual self-talk. So this passion has to be here in order to, once they're open to get into where all these programs are solidly, you know, put in, that passion is what will allow them to give into the experience of opening up to getting some new ideas. And then the unconscious, again, I can only theorize that, especially with something like smoking, that once they give into it and they have enough motivation and they give into the experience of hypnosis and let go, that once you're talking to their unconscious mind, it goes, oh my God, thank you. Thank you. Now I can get rid of that, something that we never needed to begin with. And I can start to feel better about myself, and I can start to get healthier because I run the body. And the unconscious mind, I picture it back there just throwing a celebration, a party. And I can only theorize again. That's my theory about why most smokers can quit in one session, because the unconscious still has the program that this isn't healthy for the organism. This isn't ideal. And especially nowadays, because most of the smokers I get these days, and this only has been the last years since smoking became taboo so much in public. All of a sudden, the smokers were coming in not because they were sick. That's the way the ones that used to come, because they were sick or they were afraid of getting sick, or somebody they knew or that in their family just died of lung cancer. You know, some kind of fear was the motivator. Now the motivations the last few years seem to be guilt and shame. Those are just as powerful as fear. Guilt, matter of fact, I may add those. Those are the two that might need to be added, because guilt and shame about anything. And by the way, people can have that about physical ailments too. They feel guilty because they can't do things for their family like they used to be able to do. They feel ashamed because they feel like, you know, maybe they did something to cause this inside of their body. So guilt and shame are powerful negative emotions that affect the entire organism, obviously. And the unconscious, since it runs the emotions and the organism, as soon as you get to that identity and with that passion to change something, that's why I theorize some things change so fast.